First of all, thank you for those of you who have stayed to the end, because the end is often the best, and it will be. So I want you all to tell your colleagues who left a little early they missed an unbelievable speech by Mayor Peduto and an unbelievable closing panel. As you know, or maybe you don't, there would not be a Pittsburgh cluster, and there would not be today our spring annual city cluster workshop if it were not for one person, and that is Mayor Bill Peduto. I called Mayor Peduto, actually I met with Mayor Peduto not long after he was elected. And despite the fact that he was incredibly busy, he couldn't have been more gracious. And because he had some past involvement when he was a member of City Council with Seals for Cities, he took about a millisecond to say, I want us to be involved and I want us to form a cluster again, because at one time Pittsburgh did have a cluster. He immediately assembled some of the best and brightest, many of whom you've heard from in the last 24 hours, people like Andrew Butcher and Bill Jenneret and Tracy Serto and Lee Halverson and Deborah Lamb. And he contacted Grant Oliphant of the Heinz Endowments. And now Pittsburgh has become literally, in less than a year, one of our strongest clusters, and it's all because of Mayor Peduto. But more importantly, you've heard for the last 24 hours, as you took your field trips throughout Pittsburgh and you talked to some of our Pittsburgh colleagues, more than 50 of whom have participated in this at some point over the last 48 hours, that something remarkable has happened in Pittsburgh over the last year, that everybody says a new sense of energy, a new sense of pride, and perhaps more than anything, a new sense of optimism and energy. And that's the power of a leader. It cannot be underestimated. In fact, it is the single greatest dividend that a city can have. Because the truth of the matter is, no matter how good those blueprints are, no matter how good those plans are, even how good the vision is, you have to have a leader who not only has the vision, but knows how to execute it. I get the opportunity to meet many mayors around the country, and there are an awful lot of great ones. But I think you're about to hear from somebody who, within the next few years, will be regarded as literally the best mayor in the United States of America. And I mean that. When I'm in your cities, I will say that about your mayors too. But having said that, I do mean it, despite what Tracy Serto said about my sincerity. Mayor Peduto, thank you for being here with us today. Please give a warm welcome to the Mayor of Pittsburgh, our host, Bill Peduto.
Those are awfully nice words. I don't know what to say about that, but I want to give you guys a little bit of a history. You gotten to see the city, right? It's kind of a remarkable city. Not what you expected. And just a show of hands, how many people, this was your first time to Pittsburgh? Right, that's what I love seeing, because I know that when you came through that Fort Pitt tunnel, what you expected to see were rusted mills falling into a dirty river, and just wondering why would anybody want to have a conference like this in Pittsburgh. And that expectation and what you see really is a difference. But that expectation was real. We were that city. And it was only 70 years ago. And you can basically break down the change in 35 years and 35 years. So without further ado, let me show you a little bit about what Pittsburgh looked like in the 1940s. And we're looking at 1939 when this was filmed, but it got worse because of World War II. And by 1945, this was Pittsburgh.
Machines, inventions, power, black out the past. Forget the quiet cities. Bring in the steam and steel, the iron men, the giants. Open the throttle, all aboard, the promised land. Pillars of smoke by day, pillars of fire by night, pillars of progress. Machines to make machines, production to expand production. There's wood and wheat and kitchen sinks and calico, all ready-made in tons and carload lots, enough for tens, thousands, millions, millions, faster and faster, better and better. don't make us any happier to know there's millions like us living here on top of it. Prisons where a guy sent up for crime can get a better place to live in than we can give our children. Smoke makes prosperity, they tell you here. Smoke makes prosperity, no matter if you choke on it. We got to face life in these shacks and alleys. We got to let our children take their chances here with rickets, typhoid, TB, or worse. They draw a blank, the kids. They have no business here, this no man's land. This slag heap wasn't meant for them. There's poison in the air we breathe. There's poison in the river. The fog and smoke below rise up and choke us. Don't tell us that this is the best that you can do in building cities. Who built this place? What put us here? And how do we get out again? We're asking. Just asking. We might as well stay in the mills and call that home. They're just as fit to live in. We mine the coal, load the furnace, roll the steel, drive the rivets. We lock the bolt on the assembly line. Lucky if we have the chance to keep the job from day to day, from month to month.
That was this. That was this city. In the 1940s, that was where my grandfathers worked, in the mills. And that was the life that they were expected to live. And you know what? We planned it. We built it as city planners and urban designers. That was what we created. That was the model of what the prosperity was. And it was based upon a single thing, profit, a bottom line of one thing, money. And then the change started happening. The Renaissance is what they called it in the 1940s. That's what the city looked like. That's looking in the areas now that you see the tech centers and looking up the hills where you see the universities. There were no trees in the hillsides. They were all killed by the smoke that was pouring out of the mills. That's looking at downtown. There's the Golden Triangle, where the point is with the fountain. That's what it looked like in 1950. It was a place where the heavy industry was at. That was the mayor who said, we've got to do it a little bit different. We have to change this because the way we're doing it, and they didn't have the term back then, but it wasn't sustainable. He worked with this guy, Richard King Mellon, and they created one of the first partnerships, a partnership that was based between the city and the corporate leaderships, Democrats and Republicans, the first of the public-private models of changing cities. They created the first redevelopment authority in the country, calling it the Urban Redevelopment Authority, so the debt wouldn't be placed on the city, but the things that would need to happen could happen through it. And through that, they created one of the first parking authorities. They created the Allegheny Conference in Community Development when the Hines family still ran Hines, and the Mellon family still ran Mellon, and the Hunt family ran Alcoa. And the civic pride was there within the corporations to do more than just to take care of the bottom line and the stakeholders and the shareholders, but to do something about this place that we had destroyed. That was downtown Pittsburgh during the day. The lights never turned off. 24 hours a day, the street lights had to be on. If you worked in corporate America and you wore a white shirt, you had to bring a second shirt because your shirt would turn black during the day. And this is what they envisioned, a different downtown, building out that point, taking the area that was industry and making it a park, building up a new industry not based on the factories, but based on the corporate. And in the process, over the course of the next 30 years, creating the third largest corporate headquarters in America, New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh. That was the area that's now being redeveloped, the area called the Hill District, that came right down to the city of Pittsburgh, an urban grid that would be destroyed, people that would be displaced, houses that would be torn down, a grid system that would be completely taken out. This idea of urban renewal went to East Liberty, where again, it was redevelopment through demolition. It was the wrecking ball and the bulldozer that went into the neighborhoods and tore out entire areas in order to what at that time they would call progress. How do we learn from it? You know, the investment in the building and the planning was based around another thing, the automobile. So we built bridges and tunnels. We invested in highway systems in order to get people out of downtown, in order to be able to make it so it's easier to leave the city. And that's what we saw. 1950, we had 2.4 million people living in this region. Today, we have 2.4 million people living in this region. But look at the land consumption that occurred since 1950. Who pays for all those extra sewer lines? Who pays for all those extra roads? Who pays for all the electricity and the energy that's needed in order to do it? When you have the same amount of people and you expand and sprawl out because your planning was based around roads and highways and bridges and tunnels, well, you better expect to pay more in taxes too. The transportation systems that created this city were based on rail. They were based on river. They were how to get product to market. The future is based on how to get people to workplace. These are the companies that are investing in Pittsburgh today, and I could add Uber, who's just announced recently there's about 100 engineers that are working here, and that number could become tenfold within the next few years. George Westinghouse wasn't building air brakes. George Westinghouse was creating innovation. And that same innovation that helped to build the old is now part of building the new. That was East Liberty. Beautiful, beautiful urban neighborhood of the turn of the century, the third largest business district in the state of Pennsylvania after downtown Philly and downtown Pittsburgh. Those are Burnham, beautiful buildings that were stood there next to the Mellons Church, the Presbyterian Church. They tore down the beautiful building and built a nice little one-story bank instead, as we tore down most of East Liberty. That's East Liberty today and what we're doing. We're putting it back together. We're taking the pieces of a George Moses era idea of how to redevelop and build a city, and we're putting the Jane Jacobs part back in, and we're connecting and rebuilding the street grids, and we're making the streets more usable for everyone, not just for the car. But we're doing it first through a community plan, and we're taking the time and investing the money in order to make sure that the people who've gone through the bad times have an opportunity not only to say what it will look like, but to be a part of the good times. The folks that helped to build this city, the workers that were a part of it, are the basic building blocks of who we and what we are trying to do to build that next part. We have one of the worst combined sewer problems, a vestige of our industrial past. Every time it rains, raw sewage flows into our rivers. We have a plan to do it that would create one of the biggest septic tanks in the world and place it under the river. We've worked with the EPA and the Department of Environmental Protection to scrap that plan over the past year, and instead looking at a green first plan that will be able not only to create a better system and a more cost-effective system, but to be able to go into the neighborhoods that have not seen any development and see development in parks, in parklets, in green opportunities. To be able to take blight and to turn it into beauty while at the same time retaining the water in a natural system and not having to rely upon a gray solution. To be able to go into neighborhoods that were the birthplace of people like August Wilson, and to be able to look at the treasures that are still there and enhance upon them with something that will be there 100 years from now. This is a census tract of unemployment. The darker it is, the higher the unemployment. The darker it is, the higher the percentage of African Americans living in the city of Pittsburgh. There's a direct proportion to unemployment and race within the city of Pittsburgh. We're partnering with smaller groups, again, small is the new big, like the Trade Institute of Pittsburgh, that only attracts and retains folks who've come out of prison. So ex-offenders are 100% of their students. And unlike other trades, there is no cost to join. It's supported by our foundation communities, by others, even including our corporate. And what they're doing is teaching them the basics of what built this city: bricklaying, ironwork, the ability to do craftsman work. and they have a 100% employment after training. This is what happens. A city that was built and a middle class that was created through jobs that were paid because of unions that protected workers. As that union membership decreased, so did the amount of people that were able to join the middle class. We have to realize that the mills never left. They just moved up the hill, and they're called Carnegie Mellon, the University of Pittsburgh, UPMC. And to that person who cleans that hospital room, to that person who's the security guard at that university, those same opportunities to be a part of the middle class have to be in the system of the new economy that we based. We cannot take the sacrifices that were made 100 years ago, 50 years ago, by our parents and our grandparents to be able to have a middle class and then ignore the fact for those that will be a part of it now who work in a different industry not to be a same part of what is part of Pittsburgh's pride. Early childhood education, the keystone. You know, we provide every kid that graduates from Pittsburgh Public Schools a $40,000 grant to be able to go to higher education. And it's called the Pittsburgh Promise. And at the tail end, it's very instrumental in having kids that probably wouldn't have the opportunity to go to school, the opportunity to advance. But we're not doing a good enough job of getting those kids to be promise ready. And it doesn't happen when they go into high school. It happens when they're 3 years old. It happens when they're 6 years old. And it starts in second grade. If they're not reading at the same level as their classmates, chances are they're not going to be on that path and ever be able to accept that grant. So we want to become the city that has 100% pre-K enrollment, and then at the back end, a scholarship to help them to be able to get there. You know what's interesting about Pittsburgh? We're small enough that we can do this because we have about 12,000 kids under the age of 5. We know that half of them are already in a program. We can work around a number of 6,000 and become from the city of steel to the city of education. That's the graduation rate. And again, we're looking at the same thing. It's not an indication of race, it's an indication of poverty. We need to get the levels of the jobs that are out there now where they're able to be jobs that can lift people into middle class, sustain families, and give kids an opportunity from an early childhood education. These solutions are never going to happen from Washington, never. And they're unlikely to ever happen from your state capital. It will only happen by working together and creating new partnerships within your city. In fact, in our state, up until recently, with the new governor that just got in, we've been cutting the amount of money that's been going to pre-K. And does it work? Yes. And these numbers can't be disputed, that those kids that get an opportunity early in life have success later. And then we must figure out how to build the system around it. What is the capacity that city government must have that is different than in the past? We can no longer just provide public safety and public works and have a police chief and a director of public works. We need to think about where it is that city government won't do the job, but enable those on the front lines to be able to do it better. And it works around different titles and different goals. People that work in empowering faith-based institutions, empowering the groups that are out there in the nonprofit community, working on education, affordable housing, and entrepreneurship, while at the same time hitting on the other level of using technology and innovation to make every city service more effective, more efficient, and more equitable. That is the city we want to build. And there's one other video I want to show you, because I think it shows the stark contrast to the first video, and that is the city of Pittsburgh that we live in today.
So when the steel mills closed down, a lot of people didn't have that many jobs. So people just started leaving, and the number of people living in Pittsburgh went down. But I think it's slowly starting to creep back up. And so since that's happening, I think more people are starting to come back. Oh, people are coming back to Pittsburgh, so that means I should come back too. You know, I think that's what other people are saying.
There's a lot of things that we can do in order to improve our air quality. And I think that if we're going to settle for the air quality as it is today, then we need to dream bigger.
Because there's really some good people out here that want to help change the world, change Pittsburgh, change Hugwood, but we're not being noticed.
For the future of our kids, I just want my kids to live in a healthy environment and airspace. I feel like global warming is going to negatively impact that.
Personally, I believe that global warming is almost penance that we're paying for our poor management of the globe and our mistreatment of the planet.
My concept of sustainability is being able to just do more than just being able to sustain your lifestyles and being able to go beyond that.
Well, the first step for dealing with any sorts of these problems is to acknowledge that you actually have a problem. So in the past, we've had problems with the ozone layer, for example. We actually dealt with that. We changed legislation and we accomplished something.
I just hope that my kids stay here, and I think we plan on it.
Too often I see around me people that are oblivious or say, you know, it's a scam. I think it's important that we educate the children now and the leaders of the future so that we can make the best decisions moving forward.
We've been talking a lot about renewable energy, so in the future I would like Pittsburgh to run sustainably on mostly renewable energy.
I want to know that when I walk out the door that I'm safe.
I think the air quality in Pittsburgh is a concern. We try to live healthy lives, we try to eat well, we try to exercise, but I recognize that by living here, my kids are at a greater risk for heart disease and cancer simply because of the air that they breathe.
I like living in Pittsburgh because you get to go in all these buildings around the world, and it's actually like really fun. If they were like taller, it would be awesome.
When Pittsburgh gets behind something, it's a beautiful thing to watch.
I guess a priority of mine would be smart planning, you know, looking to the future.
I think that education's really important, so I want to make sure kids have lots of education. I'll be like a grown-up soon, and it's going to be really fun.
I want to be an architect or a hardware engineer. So when you're like, I think that there's not a lot of hardware engineers, African American hardware engineers in the USA, and I just want to make that little tiny percentage maybe a tiny bit bigger.
I'd like to see us all act with pride. I think if we do that, whether we're leaders, pastors, teachers, students, parents, if we ask ourselves each day, am I acting in a way that can make my children proud, my constituents proud, myself proud, then we will make progress.
We still have some work to do. I hope you've had the opportunity not only to share ideas of what we can do to change cities around this country and around the world, but to take a moment to look at what this city has been able to do in its past 70 years and understand that you can do anything you can dream in your city. Watch out though. These next 30 years, we're going to do a lot more. Thank you for being in Pittsburgh.